Hello everyone, my name is Ratna Juwita and I am from Indonesia. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Groningen from the Department of Transboundary Legal Studies. I'm from the Faculty of Law and my research interest is about international law, anti-corruption and human rights. My research is about corruption as a violation of human rights. Since the adoption of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption in 2003, the topic of corruption and human rights became very prominent. And the devastating impact of corruption towards the realization of human rights becomes the focus of the legal scholars and other scholars in these fields. One of the trajectories in this research is to establish that corruption amounts to a violation of human rights. So in my research, I believe that the problem of corruption must be contextualized. Therefore, I chose Indonesia as the case study. And then to contextualize further which rights that I'm talking about, I chose the right to health and the right to education as the focus for the human rights that I study about. And then I collected the judgments from the Corruption Eradication Commission's annual reports to show what pattern of corruption in health and education sector corruption that are happening in Indonesia. And then from that part of the research, I found that there are three types of corruption in my based on my data. The first is grand corruption in the procurement process. The second is corruption in the judiciary, and the third is corruption related to decentralization. That's the first part of my research. And the second part is I use this typology to argue whether corruption amounts to a violation of human rights. The problem in Indonesia is we are limited by the jurisdiction of the Human Rights Court that is limited only to serious or gross human rights violations. Therefore, it's difficult to put corruption cases into Human Rights Court. But from the evidence that I found from the corruption judgments, there are several judges of in anti-corruption cases in Indonesia argue that corruption amounts to a violation of social and economic rights of the people. Unfortunately, they did not explain further in their judgments why corruption amounts to a violation of social and economic rights of the people, while I see that this is an important evidence that there is a growing understanding between judges in Indonesia on how we can conceptualize corruption as a violation of human rights. This finding is very important because in other courts in other countries, judges are also trying to make legal explanation how to connect corruption and human rights in the form of corruption as a violation of human rights. So the domestic practice in Indonesia will give us promising potential that in the future, with a lot of interactions, discussions between legal scholars and the practitioners in the field, we can really argue that corruption amounts to a violation of human rights. I think this is very important because the victim of corruption, they have human face because the impact of corruption is real. And when the current process is when corruptors punished, they are just punished because of their conduct of doing corruption. But the victims of corruption, they are being excluded from the whole process. Making corruption as a violation of human rights, we can include the victims into the process, and we can give a stronger message that corruption is not just a common crime, but it's a violation of human rights as well. And then the last part of my research is to explain the transformation of corruption as a violation of human rights from an emerging norm in international relations into a legal norm. This is important because the challenge that we have right now, it is the evidence of the judgment that conceptualize corruption as a violation of human rights. We don't have it yet, at least in Indonesia. But there are many normative outputs from international human rights institutions that started to build this argumentation. And we need the court to conceptualize it in order to make it a legal norm. So I utilize the international relations concept from Finnemore and Seeking, the international norm dynamics, to map the process of this emerging norm to be transformed into a legally binding norm. And from my research, I can see that this norm is still an emerging norm. It is not matured yet because this norm is still being discussed by a lot of international actors. And then I utilize the interactional legal theory from Brun and Toop to explain what kind of guidance that we can use for the international actors, in this case, the norm entrepreneurs, to further foster the transformation of this norm. And the interactional legal theory suggested that the norm entrepreneurs must focus on fulfilling the standard of legality to transform this emerging norm into a legal norm. I selected the special rapporteur on anti-corruption and then Indonesian judges and Transparency Internationals as the norm entrepreneurs in my research. And from their normative outputs, I found that we are close to transform this norm into a legal norm. But the problem is the norm entrepreneurs, they must focus on fulfilling the standard of legality in order to make sure that this norm can continue to progress. It will take time, but I'm sure that we are in the right direction to make it happen. I believe that legal norms will provide more guarantee and stronger protection towards the people. So at the moment, the field of anti-corruption and human rights, they seem like they are divided into two trajectories. I think that conceptualizing corruption as a violation of human rights, we can connect these two trajectories and we will provide not just better anti-corruption strategy, but also we can provide better realization of human rights for the people. The link between my research and the research group, it's clear. It's because corruption poses a serious threat towards the development, security, and justice. And I am very honored to be part of the group because the problem of corruption, it is not just a single problem that can only be solved through the legal approach. The problem of corruption is a multifaceted problem that must be analyzed from various approaches, from various fields. That's why being part of this group gives me a home where I can discuss the problem of corruption and human rights from the legal perspective into a broader perspective. I think that my research will be enriched by the contribution from scholars in international relations, in economics, even in other fields which sometimes I think it has no connection at all with my research. But knowledge comes from everywhere, and with more people study about corruption and human rights, I think that I can have more inputs to enrich my research. So I am very honored to be part of this group. Thank you.